Welcome to another session of Old Testament Survey. We are in session number 48, and today we'll begin at Daniel chapter 3. So that takes care of the intro. We've been in Daniel now for a couple of sessions. I've done the introduction, so we know a lot of the background. Daniel is an important book on a whole lot of different levels. And in this chapter, we're going to see some interesting stuff, some background that you wouldn't necessarily notice any other way. There we go. I love technology, I'll tell you what, but sometimes it gets to be a hassle keeping up with it all. As we get into chapter 3, we're going to introduce Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's the Babylonian names of the 3 young men who joined Daniel in exile in Babylon. And we don't know where Daniel was during this episode, but the 3 young men get themselves thrown into a furnace, which has got to be enough to ruin your whole day. And that's what it was supposed to be anyway. So we'll look at some of the details of that and see if we can make sense of what the text is actually telling us. Chapter 2, as you'll recall, was Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a great big statue. The statue was extremely tall. It was a great big thing, head of gold. But then the details of that statue are actually fairly important because it goes down to silver and then bronze and then iron and then the clay and iron feet. The statue has a particular prophetic importance. And Nebuchadnezzar was given that dream in order that he might understand his small place in a much larger historical movement. That was the whole point. God is doing this whole plan. He's laying out the whole trajectory, and Nebuchadnezzar has this part. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar, this is your thing. You start here and you end there. You're the first in a series of 4 kings or kingdoms that produce the time of the Gentiles. Okay, and we understand this time of the Gentiles as beginning when Gentile powers control the Temple Mount and ending when Christ himself returns to retake control of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is the key, and the Gentile nations are the nations that surround Israel and have always been her enemies. And that is the essential dynamic of this 4 kingdom layout. And so we've got this big statue. So what happens in chapter 3? We don't know how long after the statue dream Nebuchadnezzar does this next act. Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. Okay, an image is a big statue whose height was 60 cubits. That's roughly, let's translate cubits into meters. That's roughly 30 meters high. This is another way of saying that is it's really tall. That's the size of a 9-story building. This is a great big statue. And I'm assuming it had a wooden frame and it was covered with gold leaf. But whatever it was a great big statue, and it was very impressive. And everybody who saw it thought, "Wow, that's a big statue." And it's significant. I think it's significant that Nebuchadnezzar decided to make the whole statue out of gold. Uh, so why would he do a thing like that? Well, the dream had said, Nebuchadnezzar, you're in luck. You've got a big part in history. You get the entire head. That's the gold part. You're the head of gold. And Nebuchadnezzar, in his recount of this, as he's building on that foundation, says, I don't want just the head. I want the whole statue. Forever and ever, I will be the king. Everybody who walks in says, "Oh, king, live forever." So maybe I just will. And I'll be the head of gold forever and ever and ever, and there will never be a replacement for the Babylonian kingdom. Well, it isn't going to work that way. It doesn't ever work that way. And Nebuchadnezzar was going to have to be discouraged. At any rate, he set this thing up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So this is out in the flatland surrounding Babylon, not too far from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And at this point, Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, justices, magistrates, all the other officials of all of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image. Now, we're not told that this image was supposed to be a god. It was probably supposed to represent Nebuchadnezzar as the representative of God. But at any rate, the representative, all of the government employees from the whole country, and this would be a large number. This is no doubt a really, really big bureaucracy in Babylon. Totalitarian states routinely need a lot of people to run them. And Babylon no doubt had a gigantic bureaucracy, and all of them are dependent on state income. That's how they maintain their lifestyle. They've got this great government job with a lot of income and a great retirement plan. And so the last thing they want to do is to stand on principle and to make the king angry. So everybody's going to show up when they're called to. So they all arrived, verse 3, satraps and prefects and governors and all the other officials for the dedication, and they stood before the image Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." So this becomes a test of worship. And that's really what I want to focus on in this chapter, the concept of worship. Let me shift over to the share screen, which isn't all that impressive, but it will be later on. We're going to share this. That way I don't monopolize the screen. So Nebuchadnezzar lays out a decree that everyone is to worship. You have no choice in the matter. You're going to have to worship this gigantic golden statue. Now, the word for worship in the Aramaic text is actually very similar to the Hebrew text. For most of us, that doesn't matter very much. But the Hebrew word here is hishtahava. You don't have to remember that, but it's a unique word. It's a really unusual word. And it means to enthusiastically submit myself to a God who is worthy of infinitely more than I could possibly give him. So It's a voluntary and enthusiastic submission of all that I am to a God who is worthy. Uh, Worship is not is not encompassed in the ritual that we do. So when we have the Lord's Supper on a Sunday morning, that's that of course is a part of worship, but it doesn't comprise worship. When we sing together, that can be a part of worship certainly, but it doesn't fulfill the expectations of worship. Worship is actually an attitude of voluntary submission to God with enthusiasm. I give myself to God because it's what I want to do. I want to belong to Him. I want to live for Him. I want my life to count for Him. That's worship. And worship is not something that can be accomplished in the biblical sense in an hour on Sunday morning or in the 20 minutes of music before the sermon. That's not our worship time. That is, when we do that right, it is a call to worship. It is an invitation to spend a lifetime in worship. That's the whole. That's the whole point of Christian worship. Well, the biblical concept of worship is something that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would have known all about. The herald proclaims, "Oh, peoples of every nation and language, when you hear the brass band." It includes bagpipes. Just stop there. I don't have any idea what the Aramaic word for bagpipe is. I suspect it's not the same as the Scottish bagpipes that my father grew up with back in Glasgow. I honestly don't know what that's translating, but I could just imagine what kind of racket would have been made by this combination of harps and horns and pipes and miscellaneous things. Anyway, here comes the music. When you hear the racket, everybody fall down and worship the golden image. The word "fall down" there is a part of the word to worship. When when an individual wants to demonstrate his submission to a king, he bows to the ground. He puts his hands on the ground, averts his eyes. It doesn't have to lay out flat, but to bow down to the ground. And we do that symbolically when we give ourselves to God. This is the worship that we're after. In Romans chapter 12, verse 1, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable worship. So that living sacrifice is, in fact, the worship that God expects of us. And Christian worship at its best embodies the living sacrifice. It's very, very, very important concept. Here we go, and I'm going to, okay, that's fine. Okay, so fall down and worship the golden image. So in a form, this is idolatry. I believe the statue represents Nebuchadnezzar. People were to worship him as before a god-like figure. So whoever doesn't fall down shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. So as soon as all the peoples heard, this is verse 7, the brass band sounding, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped. Now, it was no problem for them because they were used to falling down and worshiping rocks and sticks and stuff. The idols. Idolatry involves uh, going through some motions. You you kneel, you stand up, you sit down, you pray, you make a little sacrifice of this and a little sacrifice of that. You say some prayers and you walk out and you've done your thing, and nothing changes. In idolatry, uh, the the so-called God to whom you are praying can do nothing. He can't hear. He can't answer. He can't act. He doesn't change anything. He doesn't make any difference. And the people of Babylon understood that their worship of idols was essentially meaningless. They knew that. They knew that even if there were any gods out there, those gods really didn't pay any attention, and that the worship was primarily a political act. You were letting the king know that you were willing to submit to him as though to a god, uh, and it didn't change anything. So these people didn't have any particular convictions about all of the other gods. They worshiped all the gods equally because they knew that all of the gods were equally impotent. They could do nothing. Uh, Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. That's verse 8. And they declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever, which is a nice thing to say, but it never happens. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the brass band shall fall down and worship the golden image, and whoever doesn't should be thrown into the fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image you have set up. So this is a political vendetta. This is an attempted assassination of three young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who had been appointed to positions of some power because of their skill, their honesty, and their dedication to Nebuchadnezzar's goals. So these were good men. And as we like to say, no good deed ever goes unpunished. So uh, the deep state of the ancient Babylonian world uh, saw these three young men, no doubt Daniel as well, we'll see that later, as threats to their continuing livelihood. They were in a position to get fabulously wealthy beyond their wildest dreams, and they didn't want anybody messing that up. The corruption of a big government bureaucracy anywhere at any time in all of history is legendary. And you only have to study that for a bit to see that that's true. So Nebuchadnezzar was in a furious rage, verse 13. And he commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image I've set up? Now, if you're ready to hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, and so on, every kind of music, fall down and worship the image, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Okay, now that's an excellent question. Nebuchadnezzar is saying, I am the most powerful king in the whole world. It's going to take you and some greater God to get you out of this mess. So you need to either worship me and my gods and my statue, or you're going to have to find yourself a bigger God. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered, said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, and you'll notice they don't say, O Nebuchadnezzar, live forever, which is nice. It's a nice touch. We have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image you have set up. So the three friends lay down a marker, essentially. They say, King Nebuchadnezzar, we respect you. We are more than happy to serve you, but we won't worship you. We won't worship your gods, and we won't bow down to the statue. There is one God in heaven whom alone we worship. And by worship, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego meant a voluntary, enthusiastic submission of themselves to the infinite God of reality. They did not mean bowing down and going through some motions. They meant what the word actually means. So they said, we're not going to worship you or your gods. We're not going to bow down. And if you need to throw us into the furnace, then that's the way it is. You'll notice they didn't try to defend themselves against the charges. They admitted wholeheartedly that they were going to disobey the king. They had no choice. We're going to disobey the king because the God that we worship can save us from your furnace if he desires. And if he doesn't, then we'll die in the furnace. But whatever, we belong to him, when we won't worship your statue. So Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and he ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. Now, the furnace is interesting. It's probably a brick kiln. Bricks were the most common form of building material in Babylon. They had no stone. Trees were very rare. They're out in the middle of a desert with a wide river plain. So there were lots and lots of mud from which to make bricks. And those bricks could be put in a furnace and heated up very hot to the point that the silica, the glass in the brick, melts. That's what makes clay very, very hard. And those bricks from Nebuchadnezzar's time have survived to the present day. On Monday, I showed you pictures of the Ishtar Gate of Babylon. That was made with those fired clay bricks. They're very hard and very long lasting. Each and every brick has a stamp in it with Nebuchadnezzar's name. I can't imagine how much time and energy it took for some slave or another. His whole job, his whole reason in life was to take a stamp in the clay of each and every brick as it went past. Thump, 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 and Nebuchadnezzar was here, and along the bricks would go. This was a brick kiln, we think. It would be wood fired. There'd be a big fire built underneath, and then a grating up a little higher with viewports out the side and out the top. There would be an entry ramp, and it would be normally you would fill the furnace up with clay bricks laid out on the grid. And then the fire would be built up, and you'd look in through the viewport to see how things were going. In this case, the fire was built up and then extremely hot. So the fire was coming up and through the flue and up the chimney, and the ramp was built at the top of the chimney where the three young men could be tossed into the fire. And it turns out it was so hot that the soldiers who were responsible for throwing the men into the fire were burned in the process. They died. The king's order was that severe. It was urgent. The furnace was overheated. This is in verse 22. And it killed the men who took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego up. And the three men fell bound into the burning furnace. And then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste because he could look in through the viewport. A viewport in the side of the furnace was used to tell the color of the glowing bricks. That's what the port was for. And Nebuchadnezzar watched in through the port, and he saw that something strange had happened. Did we not cast three men bound into the fire? And they answered and said to the king, "True, O king." And he answered and said, "But I see four unbound and walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the appearance of the fourth is like a son of the gods." Some of our translations will say, like the Son of God. And that's not that's not correct. It should be like a son of the gods. What Nebuchadnezzar would have seen here was a supernatural being, probably an angel, but a powerful spiritual being with a visible form, who had been sent to rescue Daniel's friends from this furnace. And Nebuchadnezzar looked in, and here are the three young men, and here's their supernatural friend walking around in the furnace, carrying on a conversation. So Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace, and he declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." This is in verse 26. And so out they came. 27. And the satraps, prefects, and governors, king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of those men. The hair on their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, there was no smell of fire upon them. And Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, and this is fun. This is in verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar might be accused of having mood swings. Perhaps he's got a bipolar personality. For just as fiery and evil and destructive as his anger had been a moment before, now he was friendly and it's an interesting guy. "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God." Okay, so at this point, Nebuchadnezzar is amazed, and he has correctly derived that these men were saved by the acts of God, that an angel has been sent to save them from the furnace. And so now here comes the Nebuchadnezzar's decree, and again, this is Nebuchadnezzar, and this is a vintage Nebuchadnezzar. "Therefore, I make a decree: any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins." Okay. So, in other words, Nebuchadnezzar didn't have any concept at all of religious freedom, or freedom of speech, or freedom of anything. You're being told there is no waiting room down here. They're being told everybody is going to have to do just what I tell you to do. It says there's no other God able to rescue in this way. And the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon, which is very interesting. This is a this is a big deal, and you can imagine that the bureaucrats of Babylon were extremely unhappy, but they couldn't say anything. If they said anything to criticize the king's decision, they'd be thrown into a furnace. This would have been a tough place to work. And I can't imagine living in it. We get into chapter 4. We're going to see yet another. Okay, where is my cursor? There it is. We're going to see a second vision. Well, yet another vision. This is the dream that Nebuchadnezzar has of a tree. And the chapter starts out with Nebuchadnezzar's testimony to the sovereignty of God. This is important, and at the end of the chapter, we're going to see a repetition of this. So that forms the bookends of the chapter, and this experience, the tree vision, and Nebuchadnezzar's field trip afterwards, form a life-changing experience for Nebuchadnezzar. Now, I'm not sure how life-changing, but it's on the basis of this that I have any hope at all of seeing Nebuchadnezzar in heaven. So listen to what he has to say. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It has seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. It seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders the Most High God has done for me. Now, note he uses the name that we often find on the lips of Gentile believers. Most High God was the name that Melchizedek worshipped. Jethro worshipped the Most High God. We're going to see this name on the lips of non-Jewish believers. So that's interesting. Signs and wonders. How great are his signs? How mighty are his wonders? His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. So Nebuchadnezzar admits here that God operates outside of the natural realm. His signs and his wonders are, in fact, supernaturally powerful. And secondly, that his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar was admitting here that his own kingdom would eventually end, and that God gives to kings great power, and then he takes them down from that power. Nebuchadnezzar has learned something, and then he, in verse 4 and following, tells the reason for what he had learned. And this is a testimony to the power of yet another vision. So I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house, prospering in my palace. I saw a dream that made me afraid. I lay in my bed, and the fancies and visions of my head alarmed me. So I made a decree that all the wise men should be brought before me, that they might make known the interpretation. Then the magicians and enchanters and Chaldeans and all the rest of them could not make known to me its interpretation. And then Daniel came to me. And I told him the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, named after one of his gods, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery is too difficult, tell me the vision. The vision I had in my head as I lay in my bed were these. I saw a tree in the midst of the earth. Its height was great. The tree grew and became strong. Its top reached to heaven. It was visible to the ends of the whole earth. Its leaves were beautiful and its fruit abundant. And in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the heavens lived in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. Okay, that's good. In my visions, I saw a watcher, a holy one who came down from heaven. So we've got this big tree, and it's really prospering and very fruitful. And then here comes a watcher, an angel, who proclaims aloud, chop down the tree, lop off the branches, strip the leaves, scatter the fruit, let the beasts flee from under it and the birds from its branches, but leave the stump in the earth, bound with a band of iron. And let him be wet with the dew of heaven, and his portion with the beasts. Let his mind be changed from a man's mind to a beast's mind. Let him be given the mind of a beast. How strange. And let 7 periods of time pass over him. The sentence is by decree, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High God rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. So the point that Nebuchadnezzar is supposed to learn is that there is a king in heaven who reigns eternally and gives the kingdoms of men to whom he will. So the message can be stated simpler. There is an eternal God in heaven who has created the heavens and the earth, and you, O Nebuchadnezzar, are not him. There is someone greater. You have to learn that there is someone greater than yourself, and he is the king. So this is the dream, and you, O Belteshazzar, tell me the interpretation, because I know the spirit of the holy gods is in you. So Daniel was dismayed for a while. This is verse 19. His thoughts alarmed him. The king answered and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or its interpretation alarm you. Belteshazzar answered and said, my lord, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. The tree you saw, which grew and became strong, and all of the rest, it is you, O king, verse 22, who have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reached heaven, your dominion to the ends of the earth. And because the king saw a watcher coming down, saying, chop down the tree, verse 24, this is the interpretation, O king. It's the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king, that you shall be driven from among men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and shall be wet with the dew of heaven for 7 periods of time, until you know that the Most High rules, and that the kingdoms of men will be given to whom he wills. Okay, and the stump is left in the ground so that your kingdom will be confirmed to you from the time that you recognize that heaven rules. So it's actually a fairly simple test. Okay, there's one God in heaven, and he has allowed you to become powerful, but he can also bring you down. And if you can submit willingly to him, well and good. But if not, you're going to be driven out of your kingdom, because God is king eternally. Oh yeah, that's a key point, because when we think about all of the events of history, all of the ups and downs and goods and bads and miscellaneous stuff that happens in history, it's easy to think that these things are taking God by surprise. And God is playing catch up and trying to trying to fix things. We notice things that are wrong in the world, and so we pray, and God says, "Oh, I didn't know that. I'll send an angel to take care of that problem right away." When instead, what we have here is the movements of nations, the movements of kingdoms. Great powers rise up and great powers fall, and all of it is being orchestrated, it's being developed, it's being driven by the plan and the power of Almighty God. There is a God in heaven who created all that is and who will one day destroy all that is. And in between, he is operating according to his purpose. And you, O King Nebuchadnezzar, are just a part of that. You've got one little part to play. You are the head of gold. Enjoy it while it lasts and prepare to worship the God who reigns eternally. That's the message here. And it ends up being, I think, a fairly important message for all of us. And Nebuchadnezzar heard that. Um, Daniel says, "You really need to repent, king. Oh, king, live forever. You need to repent or you're going to be in serious trouble." Well, verse 28 tells us all this came upon the king. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the palace in Babylon, and he says, "Is this not Babylon the Great, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty?" Okay, well, that's pride. And pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Even God couldn't put up with that any longer. God is awfully merciful, but this wasn't going to go over well. So God says, "That's it. That's it." The words were still in his mouth, and here comes the voice from heaven: "O King Nebuchadnezzar, the kingdom has departed from you." He was given the mind of an animal. We don't know what that means. He was driven from his kingdom. We don't know if there was a palace coup. There's no historical mention of this. There are a couple of empty places in the Babylonian Chronicles where this might fit, but we don't have any confirmation outside of the Bible. It appears that Nebuchadnezzar went slightly nuts. He was given the mind of an animal, the mind of a ground squirrel, and he went out into the fields and ate grass, let his hair and his fingernails grow long, and we don't know how long it was. The Bible says 7 periods of time. That could be 7 days, 7 hours. I don't know how long it would take for Nebuchadnezzar to come to his senses and recognize that even the squirrels in the field know that they are dependent on a sovereign God. When we pray the Lord's Prayer, we say, "Oh Lord, give us this day our daily bread." We're acknowledging our dependence. God is the provider of all that is. And we simply receive that. And Nebuchadnezzar needed to learn that thing. So this thing came true. And at the end of those days, verse 34, "I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes to heaven. My reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom endures for generations, and all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. He does according to his will among the host of the heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. None can stay his hand or say to him, 'What have you done?'" Nebuchadnezzar is acknowledging that there is one sovereign king, and that is the God of heaven. He is acknowledging his own dependence on that one true God. If this isn't a conversion event, it's awfully close to it. We'll find out, I think, when we get to heaven. But like I say, I'm just romantic enough to kind of hope that Nebuchadnezzar made it. And this goes on. At the same time, my reason returned, and the glory of my kingdom, majesty, and splendor returned. I was established, and I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the kingdom of the King of heaven. For all his works are right, his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. And you'll notice, yeah, this is actually really significant. He does not say at the end of this chapter, and anybody who doesn't worship, fall down and worship the God of heaven, I'm going to throw into a furnace, which is nice. It tells me that perhaps Nebuchadnezzar changed. This is the last we see of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar died. We don't have an account of that. He had four sons who succeeded him. And Belshazzar is the next one who is mentioned. Now, Belshazzar is actually not a son of Nebuchadnezzar. He is the second in command under the son of Nebuchadnezzar, Nabonidus, who was the last king of Babylon. Nabonidus is off in the off somewhere in Arabia, chasing his dream. He wanted to control the whole world and make everybody submit to his power. So he was off with his army doing that. Nabonidus is a legendary character for many years, for centuries, really. People have wondered whatever happened to Nabonidus. And the fact is, a few years ago, on the border between Egypt and Libya, out in the Sahara Desert, some oil exploration teams found a bunch of artifacts lying on the surface of the ground. So they brought some experts out from Cairo who looked at these things and determined this is Iron Age weapons and armor. This is the remains of a great army. It dates to about the time that Nabonidus and his army would have been in the neighborhood. So it's entirely possible that Nabonidus marched his army out into the Sahara Desert, not knowing that there was no water that way, because there's no place close to an oasis. They would have stopped at the Qattara Depression. By the time they got to the border with Libya, that would have taken another 5 or 6 days. They'd have been out of water. So Nabonidus, very interesting guy, but he left Belshazzar in his place. And we have this chapter 5, the handwriting on the wall, which is all the way to the end of the Babylonian kingdom. Daniel, by this time, is getting to be a relatively old man. He's got to be 85 at least. The captivity has gone on for 70 years. He was a teenager when he was taken to Babylon. So maybe 85, maybe older. So we don't want to visualize Daniel as this little boy coming in. He's all grown up. So King Belshazzar made a great feast for thousands of his lords, and they drank wine in front of the thousands. And Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and silver taken by Nebuchadnezzar his father from the temple of Jerusalem be brought out, and the kings and lords and the wives and concubines might drink from them. And they brought the golden vessels. And all of the king and his lords and wives and concubines drank from them, and they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron and wood and stone. So a giant party is being thrown in the royal palace in Babylon. And all the thousands of government hangers on, the court, the bureaucrats, the various satraps and whatever, are there in the palace. And Belshazzar, with his wives and concubines, a massive crowd, is eating and drinking and starting to get wild and crazy. And he brings the vessels from the temple. Well, that's it. God wasn't going to take any more. I need to make a note about exactly what is going on here because it's actually fairly important. The night that this happened, the Persian army was at the gates, and we'll talk about them at the end of the chapter, because the Persian army is going to take the city of Babylon that very night. And that's what the handwriting is all about. Okay, so they were drinking and praising the gods of wood and stone and whatever. And suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. And then the king's color changed. That means the blood ran out of his head. His blood pressure dropped. I know about these things. And his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way and his knees knocked together. This is what happens to a man just before he passes out. And if you drink enough wine, this comes a whole lot more suddenly. So he was already a drunken bum. When he saw this, it terrified him, and he's about to faint. And the king called loudly to bring in enchanters and Chaldeans and all of the rest of the usual crowd, who had never been able to do any good for any of the previous kings. And the king declared, whoever reads this writing and shows me the interpretation shall be clothed with purple, have a chain of gold, and be made the third ruler in the kingdom. Okay, third ruler. Nabonidus is number one, Belshazzar is number two, and then whoever can read this is number three. And actually, it wouldn't have been hard to read. It was written in Aramaic, in the angular Aramaic script of the day, but it was cryptic. So there we are. The queen, because of the words of the king, came into the banqueting hall and says, "O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods." And so she introduces Daniel. And Daniel is brought in. And we see Daniel in verse 13. He was brought in. The king answered and said to Daniel, "You are Daniel, one of the exiles." And apparently Belshazzar had never interacted with Daniel before. Bad mistake. In verse 16, if you can read the writing and make note of its interpretation, you'll be clothed in purple, gold chain, be the third ruler. And Daniel answered, said, "Let your gifts be for yourself. Give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I can read the writing." So, recognize Daniel is a senior statesman. He's an old man. He's been there and done that. And he knows if the king decides to kill him, he dies, he'll go to heaven. And frankly, that doesn't frighten him. It's fine. You kill me, I'm going to go to heaven. What else have you got? O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar, your father, kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. There's the key point. This kingdom was given to Nebuchadnezzar. Belshazzar, you have squandered it. Because of the greatness he gave him, all the peoples feared him, and they trembled. In verse 20, but when his heart was lifted up, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken away from him. That was the tree experience. He was driven from among the children of mankind. But you, his son, verse 22, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all of this. You've lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven. And you've even uh, desecrated the vessels of the temple of the Lord of heaven. Verse 23, middle of this. But the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. Uh, and so the writing has been shown, and this is the writing that was inscribed. And it's written out, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. And that's Aramaic, and it's actually fairly straightforward. Mene is the Hebrew mina. It's a way of counting. It's weights for counting. And Daniel says that Mene means your kingdom has been numbered or accounted. That's the interpretation. Tekel is the unit of weight, the shekel. The modern Israeli coin is called the shekel. And it's worth about 25 euro cents. So here we have Mene Tekel, Upharsin. Parsin is a play on words. The Aramaic word means to be divided. And it is also the name of the empire that is attacking from outside the gates. The Persians. The Persians are the ones who are divided. They are a multitude of kingdoms that have formed into an alliance to become the Persian Empire. So Daniel says, the days of your kingdom are numbered. You've been weighed in the balance and found wanting. And so your kingdom is going to be divided up amongst your enemies. As this was being said, the Persians were coming into the city through the water gate of the Euphrates River. They had actually dug a gigantic lake, an artificial lake, and drained the water of the Euphrates River into this artificial lake for just long enough that the army could march through on the riverbed underneath the barred water gate and come into the city. And that very night, Belshazzar was killed. His people were enslaved, and Daniel became an honored man amongst the Persians. And we're going to see when we get back together. Let's see, 25. I can do that. I can do chapter 6. But I'm not going to, because chapter 6 is too good a story. We're going to quit for now. And what's that?
It is.
Yeah, I want to spread out a little bit with chapter 6 because it's too much fun. But what we're seeing here is a unified message in Daniel's life and in his interaction with the various kings that he comes through, that there is a God in heaven who distributes the kingdoms of earth to those that he will. There is a God in heaven who is working out a grand eternal plan for his own purposes. And we on earth are simply a part of that. We play our roles. We walk onto the stage, we play the role that God has given us, and then we walk off the stage on the other side. Some of us are great and some of us are not. And we're all playing a role in God's plan. This idea of the eternal kingdom of God sets it above the notion of the time of the Gentiles. Okay, the Gentiles, the nations are in control of Jerusalem. Okay, so be it. But that's not forever. There is a God in heaven who is forever. And everything that we see and experience here is part of God's forever plan. And you and I are a part of God's forever plan. So we'll get to back together on, let's see, we'll be back together next Monday. Let's see if I can make all of the, okay, requesting and unmuting, but everybody has to unmute if you want to say hi. So I'm going to go to the gallery and see everybody. I hope.
Hi, Dr. Jan. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. I see everybody here, but I'm not getting my.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jan.
There they are. Hey guys.
Ciao, ciao. Thank you.
Brother Joel, Brother
Good
Willie,
night, good night,
Brother Oscar.
Donna.
Love you, Mon.
Good night.
Hey, Eddie.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night.
And good night, Dolly.
Ciao, ciao.
And bye-bye.
Ciao tutti.
We love you guys. We'll see you again on.
Good morning, Pastor Oscar.
And it will,
Hey, good
maybe there'll be a
morning.
waiting room. I hope not. We'll see if we can get it to go without. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye bye.
Okay. Good
Ciao,
night.
ciao.